The great cuddle buddy storms are the bane of my existence. I've never been fond of the boisterous thunder and never found the same comfort in rain as everyone else did. There was no problem when I was still a young boy who sought my mother's or my sister's comfort whenever a storm was raging. But now, as an adult who had just moved out and is living in his first apartment, it was a problem. That was until I met my current roommate, Theo. As I watched Theo now over dinner, we were having asparagus and salmon. Courtesy of my impeccable cooking, I wondered how I had seized such a magnetic force of a man for a roommate. Not only was he good-looking, with his intensely hazel, round eyes and sharp nose, he was also extremely intelligent. At first, he was intimidating, but over time I grew on him. Beyond his strapping body and daunting presence, he was actually a kind man. Lucky for me, that man was the great cuddle buddy of mine. Odd, I know, but it started one fateful night in the midst of a terrible storm. We had only been living together for about a month. Although we were cordial, we weren't that close yet. Before that night, the winds were harsh, and the pitch-black clouds were already foreshadowing a terrible storm. So, in the middle of that night, when the power went off because of the sheer intensity of the storm, I was not half surprised. Fully awake, and having my 9th anxiety attack of the night, I got up and used my phone as a flashlight. I was en route to the stockroom where I kept our supplies for power outages like this when I bumped into Theo. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head and reached for the emergency light. "No, much too noisy and a tad bit terrifying." "If you ask me." "You?" I asked, as I set the lamp on the center table and plopped down on the couch. He picked up his emergency light and set it next to mine before sitting beside me. "Me neither. I was working, but I guess I can't now." I laughed. "Wow, I can only wish I had half the courage to just ignore the storm." He looked perplexed and raised an eyebrow at me. "You scared of, oh my God. Colin, you're shivering," he observed as I started trembling uncontrollably when another round of thunder echoed throughout the house. "It's the thunder. That's why I couldn't sleep," I confessed, slightly sheepish that I was essentially exposing this fear of mine to my roommate. He scooted closer and put his hand on mine. My eyes lingered a bit too long on his hand. Bewildered at my body's sudden electric reaction about our skins meeting, I recovered enough and averted my gaze back to his face. His touch was soothing, and his eyes were magnetic. It awakened something in me that I had never quite felt. Was it attraction towards the same sex? Or was it merely the comfort that he provided me with at this moment? He was now stroking my hand, and while this caught my anxiety about the raging storm, it sent my heart plummeting. Would it help if I tell stories? I nodded, although I did not know for sure if that would calm me down. When I was a kid, my mother would simply cuddle with me and stroke my hand until I fell asleep during such a petrifying storm. It had been a while since I received comfort during times like this, so I was alien as to how I would react. But as he told stories about his workplace, he was a writer in a nearby publishing house, I was entertained and distracted from the storm. But I was not focusing that much on his tales but rather his magnetic eyes. They were beautiful. His soothing voice, coupled with the hand stroking my arm oh so gently, I managed to calm down. He grinned once I affirmed that I was good. "You want me to accompany you until you fall asleep?" he offered as we were walking towards my room, each holding our respective emergency lights. "Oh, that would be too much trouble for you, Theo," I replied politely. "Yes, I want you to accompany me. I'm just not that shameless to admit it out loud." I was also conscious and did not want him to feel that I was a tad bit too excited for his little arrangement. I plopped down on my bed and tucked myself in, still rather conscious with him at my door, standing and absorbing my every move. "Can I come in?" he asked politely. To this day, I do not know where I mustered my courage, but I nodded vigorously and tapped the spot next to me on my bed. He sat carefully on the bed, flashing me a weak smile and looking rather flushed. Just as when we thought the storm was calming down and I could finally get some tranquility, another round of lightning and thunder raged on, and I started getting anxious once more. To my disbelief, Theo scooted over and attempted to spoon me. "May I try?" he asked. Surely, I was very bewildered, but nonetheless willing. After all, it was just a cuddle, right? It was merely a show of comfort between two friends. Almost instantly, I felt my breath under control again, and he pulled me even closer. Every now and then, he would stroke my arm, as he did in the living room. A nice sigh inaudibly. This felt good. It felt right. I cannot help but smile. Who would have thought that as an adult I would remain to find comfort in cuddles and nestling? But not through my mother this time around. Through this man. Through my roommate, Theo? Although it took me a while to fall asleep that night. Purely because I was so giddy and at peace with this beautiful man cuddling with me. I eventually did. And I did fall asleep with him snuggled to me plenty of times after that. It became a routine whenever it was stormy. Until we even started incorporating it when we watched television together. Like now. It was Friday, so that meant movie night for me and Theo. This week, he was going to pick the movie. And I was in charge of cooking. I made some cheesy pickle nachos for us and ordered beer for him and soda for me. "How does Annabelle Comes Home sound, Colin?" he asked as I was bringing over the food. I rolled my eyes but nodded nevertheless. Aligned with this very macho outlook. He was a massive fan of horror movies. While I was basically a coward and got scared shitless by the smallest of jump scares. We were juxtapositions, but it worked. We completed each other like a puzzle piece. As usual, we were on the opposite sides of the couch facing the massive television and snacking on the food. But sooner or later, I found myself slowly scooting over towards him. Half scared and half using this opportunity to be in his proximity. Sly, I know, but we gotta do what we gotta do. Right? Sooner or later, he pulled me in closer himself. And I snuggled against his hard body. Relishing his scent. This was such a pleasant distraction for stomach movies against watching horror movies. Now if we can remain like this all the time. I bantered. I was not really joking. Honestly, I enjoyed this far too much. I enjoyed when he wrapped his arms so securely around me. With his smooth and kissable cheek resting atop my disheveled brown hair. He was holding me so close that I could almost hear his breathing. This accelerated my own breathing. It was as if we were one entity. Intertwined and breathing as one. Our weekly cuddles on Friday movie nights became so frequent that they soon became habitual. To my elation, they became nightly. It usually started off like this. He would unwind with either a cup of green tea or a glass of wine after a long day of work. He had a spot on the couch that he liked. Meanwhile, I would watch whatever I was interested on Netflix or HBO Go that night. Currently, I was watching Euphoria, and with the amount of sex drive exuding in that show, you could not blame me for wanting a bit of action myself. Even if that action merely came in Theo's cuddles, I would always scoot closer. And he would take that as a cue to pull me into his strong arms and snuggle against me while he read and I continued watching. However, lately he had been initiating these cuddles. Too. I would be chilling on the couch after dinner, nose buried on my phone and aimlessly scrolling social media, while he would be, as usual, unwinding with a book. He would reach for my arm, stroking it. I tried not to read too much into this, lest I find myself hoping that he felt the same attraction towards me as I did him. It was merely habitual, I believe, and then he would inch closer until he would eventually rest his hand on my shoulder. Or vice versa. His gorgeous face would always be so close that I could almost count how many eyelashes framed his intense eyes. Cuddle buddies, huh? I said one night, raising my eyebrows. I was rewatching Encanto one night while he was, as usual, reading some Dickens, while our legs were hooked over each other and he was curled tightly against my chest. Uh-huh, he replied, absent-mindedly. You do this with all your other buddies. Or what? He gazed at me perplexedly. Told of you to assume I have other buddies. He retorted. You're the only warm body I want to be snuggled up against. Okay, I laughed, feeling giddy but trying to play it off. Don't be too overzealous about this. Colin, you might sense your over-enthusiasm and quit this arrangement. Whatever it may be, deep down, I knew my feelings were escalating. I mean, how could they not? From the moment I laid my eyes on this man, he was out of this world. He was beautiful, both inside and out, once you get to know him beneath his rough and intimidating exterior. He was kind and very intelligent. He was opinionated and well-read. Traits I so valued in a man. Intelligence is sexy. Wow, the only warm body? Please do them for me. If you're into necrophilia. Instead, I might have to find another roommate then. He chuckled. Never. And besides, you'd never dream of replacing me. At least he got that one right. Weeks later, I heard there was another storm coming. And this was expected to last at least 3 days. So I made sure to stock up. The rain was already pouring by the time I got back home from the store. And Theo was nowhere to be found. So, I unloaded the groceries myself. I was just reaching to put cans of tomato soup into their overhead shelf when the front door was unlocked. "Honey, I'm home," Theo said playfully. I rolled my eyes, although my heart was somersaulting, and my stomach was filled with butterflies. This man knew how to push my buttons in all the right places. Usually I would be a bit more conscious for the fear that my blossoming intentions would be revealed. But just that day I felt a tad bit more flirty than usual. "Well, darling, like the good stay-at-home husband I am, I've diligently done our groceries for a week in case the storm does not subdue by then." Theo came over to the side of the kitchen that I was standing at and ruffled my already messy hair. He leaned closer, so close that I could, in fact, smell his minty fresh breath and the heat of his breathing on the side of my face. I was almost certain I was flushing because of his mere proximity. "Thank you, my honey," he winked. "But despite doing the groceries, it seems like you can't reach for the shelves to put them in their place." I hit his arm playfully, and he let out an adorable chuckle. He took the tomato can from me and placed it effortlessly on the top shelf. Yes, that is the perk of being tall. Not that I envied him or anything, but my delusion was whispering that if we were to kiss, then him leaning down to kiss me because of my shorter height would just be stomach-turning. There I go again with my whims and deep-rooted desires. I prepared my sumptuous dinner for us. Likely the last proper one we would have before our power gets cut off again. Although Theo kindly borrowed a generator for us, it would only be used for essential activities, such as charging our devices and our lamps. For that night, I made some mashed potatoes and steak, Theo's favorite. I relished the sounds of contentment he made across the table, evidently enjoying my cooking. Cooking was one of my love languages, and although I could not confess my feelings, 11:36 for him yet, I expressed it through the food that I so passionately cooked for him. It was always made with love. "Look, this is too good, Cole," he complimented. "I really might just have to wife you up after this." I was pretty sure I flushed all the way through that night after he said that. The storm was already picking up, our surroundings pitch black, and the gusts of wind strong. We were both in the living room, deciding it was better for us to hang out there and sleep there as our town braved the storm. I was a lady because I knew that the darkness coupled by the roaring thunder would be enough of an excuse for us to cuddle. Not that we had not been making it a routine nightly, with either of us going to each other's room and just cuddling until we both fell asleep. At least we were saving electricity, right? We were essentially sleeping in one room and only using one fan nightly after all. Theo was just reading while I was snuggled up against him with the power turned off shortly after 11. I suppose the winds were getting too strong, and the power lines were knocked down. "Oh well, might as well be cute asleep," he announced as he put down the book he was reading on the center table. "Let's go to bed then," I replied, a bit too nonchalantly. Why was I getting used to this? Could I really be content that we were merely roommates and cuddle buddies? Or was I ready for more? That night, I held him a little closer and snuggled up against him a bit more than usual. Lest it would be our last night of being this way. As I was concocting a plan to finally confess to him, I did not know when or how or what to say. Even all I knew was that it was going to come out when it needed to. But for now I pressed my forehead against his collarbone and rested my hand across his waist. In his sleep, he subconsciously hitched a leg around my thigh, pulling me even closer, if that was possible. I looked up at him, and my heart stopped at the sight. He looked so peaceful in his sleep, no frown lines or wrinkles visible. He was breathing steadily, and it was comforting amidst the rumbling sounds of thunder every now and then. He was my peace. I thought of our friendship and how the confession I was planning might change it. But now that this idea has plagued my mind, it would be hard to abandon it. As he snored lightly that night, I chuckled and touched my nose to the tip of his, just adoring his mannerisms and thankful that I got to share moments like this with him. We both did our own work and minded our own business the entirety of the next day. Honest to God, I needed the space from him, so I spent the majority of my time in my bedroom despite the occasional thunder and boring rain giving me so much apprehension. I thought that if I had to be in that close of a proximity as him for so long, the passion I was feeling might just burst into flames, and I might confess impulsively. It was not until dinner that I had come face to face with him. He did not think anything amiss. and he was just enjoying the broccoli and chicken leg that I had made for dinner. But as for me, I was observing him. There was no denying it. I was in love with this man. As he sat there devouring the spread and talking about books, I realized that I had indeed fallen into the abyss of love. Not much of a reader yourself, are you? He asked, trying to stir up conversation at the dinner table. I suppose I was being much too quiet. I shook my head. You count gossip sites and Twitter? Then indeed I am. But as for the books that you read, nope, I replied. He clucked his tongue and reached for my hand on the table. We must change that. There are so many different worlds you can travel to, people you can meet, adventures you can partake in, and love stories to be unraveled by picking up a book. Cole, well, give me your recommendations. Then, you said you like the glitz and glam of Hollywood, right? You have to read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. He suggested before going on and on about the plot and amazing things about the book. Try as I might to cling onto his every word, I was much too distracted by his eyes and his lips, and the thought of what I might do to those lips consumed me. And so I did what was the most common thing to do. I blurted out my emotions that very moment. I'm in love with you. I beg your pardon? He stuttered. I swallowed a lump in my throat and looked him dead in the eyes. It was now or never. If I do not have the courage to tell him how I truly felt, I never would. Hearing you talk about books and how passionate you are, it does things to me. You're highly intimidating and too gorgeous for words. But deep down you're an impeccable man with kindness that I cannot even dream of possessing myself. You are everything that I want and more. It started off with cuddles, and I thought that you were merely providing me with comfort. But it grew to be so much more than that. I'm in love with you. You can't be serious, he uttered. My heart broke into a million pieces at once. This is what I feared. He did not reciprocate. And now our bond is over. I have ruined it. I'm sorry. This was a mistake. I started. I'm in love with you too. I've been searching high and low for what I may do to express that. But I'm just not one for romantic gestures. So I expressed it in the littlest of things while I tried to convince myself to finally muster up the courage and confess. But you did it first. I began tearing up, and sooner or later, we stood up and gave each other a bear hug. He held me more tightly this time around, and I could not help but feel a different kind of content. Whenever we had cuddled in the past, I felt content because I was in his arms. But I knew that was fleeting. But this was not the same. There was hope for us. There awaits a future for us because he loves me as I do him. This is the chapter where the great cuddle buddy turns into my boyfriend. I joked. That happens to be the content of the book would you finally get to reading. He bantered right back, touching the tip of his nose on mine. The height difference was fairly obvious now. And I was not going to lie. It was cute. Maybe my tease. Well then, the great cuddle buddies are officially boyfriends. He replied, would you look at that? From cuddling during storms to snuggling every night to this. We have plenty of more storms to weather together. Darling, to be continued. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our rainbow forest and stay wholesome.